Alright guys, welcome to another episode of Comic Penciling. We are on number 17 and I'm super excited to get into this next topic because it's something I haven't touched on, and it's all about doing double page spreads. In comic books it's really a common thing to do. And so we're going to use my book Star Circuit, which you get a little preview here. You can actually go to the website starcircuitcomic.com and see the few pages that I have up and ready to preview. However, I'm going to show you the page that we're going to be discussing right now and get right into it. So a double page spread is used mainly for big action. It's usually one shot. In this case, this is the finished page, and it's going to be, as you can see, a storytelling sequence. So it's going to be used to do other things than make the big action even bigger. All right. Here I'm at the table and I want to just discuss the basics of setting up a double page spread, which is two normal size pages spliced together. And if you get the standard comic board, you're going to get a page with a lot of guides. You'll have the name and all the information at the top, and then you'll see these three guides that go further inward. The first one around the edge is the bleed. Next is the trim. That is the one we're concerned with, is the middle one. And that's the one you're going to cut. The one inside of that is the guide. So you'll see me butt the two pages up together here next to each other. So instead of using the pages like this, what you're going to want to do is cut each page along the trim line on the side that the two pages are butting up against each other. Don't worry about all the other sides. All you're worried about is the sides that the pages that are touching each other. So once you do that, you can flip them over. That way you're able to tape the pages together, but on the back side, that way you're able to work on the art side with your story work. So that being said, we are almost ready to just jump into it. There's not much else to talk about. You want to keep the accuracy of the taping and the lines and the cutting as accurate as possible. If it's not really straight, you're going to get a little bump in between the pages, and that just makes it a little more difficult in the cleanup. See, I've already laid down a whole lot of lines that are taken from the layouts that are pretty much done at the thumbnail size, which you can go back to my previous videos. There's videos for just about every step of the process. But then I take those thumbnails and I blow them up. After scanning them in, I blow them up on the computer and make them about the same size as the board. From there, I lightbox the art onto the real artboard, or sometimes I lightbox them onto a separate sheet of paper in which I do the breakdowns. In this case, it went right onto the artboard, and that's what you're seeing behind my finished lines right now. So the whole page is filled up with these breakdowns of all the guides and pretty much all the basics of every panel. You can see me using a 2H pencil, which it's actually a lead holder right now. I've actually moved away from using a lead holder, but that's also maybe another topic for another video on materials. But here I always use like a 2H no matter what, because it doesn't smudge too much and I'm able to get what I want. Now here I'm also using a blue line on this page in particular for the guides, and I use those guides to do the finished pencils in the regular 2H lead. Now the blue line is easy to pull from the page once you're in the computer, so no worries there. I do want to bring up three important things to pull from when you're trying to do a double page spread, and things that I stumbled upon pretty much when I went through this page. I haven't done too many double page spreads, but the ones that I have done were more big action, where it's one or two figures blown up real big, or it's a big close-up, or I've even done a big just all landscape kind of style double page spread. here I'm using the double page spread to utilize something else. I wanted to get a ultra wide kind of feel to these panels, and you can see this first one spans not only the first page's width but both of the pages width. So this is like about as wide as you can get any camera, probably wider than any camera you can get. And so this is one of the beauteous, is that a word, beauteous, glorious things you can do with comic books, is make up things like extreme wide, extreme ultra wide shots like this. So maybe it's a good time to explain a little bit of what's happening for this entire page. So in Star Circuit, this is my creator-owned book. If you're not aware, go to starcircuit.com or starcircuitcomic.com and you can read more and see the preview. But this is a cyberpunk book. It's literally, what I like to call it is a literal race against AI. It's been 70 years since anyone has raced professionally against what is now the standard, which is AI. So before that can even happen, the main character is not even introduced to that kind of setting and that kind of piece of the world. Right now he's just a street racer, and he's kind of got himself mixed up in the wrong crowd because he's a little lost. His family's kind of a mess, and doesn't really have any great role models to keep him from doing stuff like this. But here he's being chased by a violent gang, and they've kind of realized he's a person of importance, which he is in the story, and they kind of want his head, or maybe for ransom. Now this whole page is the start. It's my enter with a bang kind of storytelling, and here it's the start of this gigantic chase scene that spans maybe 6 or 7 pages. Most scenes never last this long in comics, and I realize that. However, I'm going to do it anyway, and so check it out. This first panel is really I put a lot of effort into trying to make it as glorious as I see in my head, and it's actually kind of came out as cool and slick as I wanted it to. So it's this first big turn that the main character on the right of the panel is taking. Oh great, right as I describe it, I move away. Here we go. So right as the gang in the back is trying to assemble and chase them, they're already on the first corner. The main character, Atlas, who's our street racer, he's kind of in the lead and kind of taken off, where the secondary characters you'll find out about they're actually his ex-girlfriend and his brother are tailing behind, trying to escape the game as well. And that's the whole, pretty much the premise here. So in this we're kind of like in a slum industrial shipping district, so there's stuff all over the place. You won't be able to see it right away, but when there's color and everything's kind of delineated a little more, maybe even in the final pencils, you'll start to see things happening. Even in the background there, you see those boxes that are like suspended in air. That's kind of like almost like a, what would you say, like a conveyor belt without a conveyor belt type of automation, where the boxes are just being transferred from one building to the next using this kind of anti-grav that's standard to the story. All right, so let's get back to how awesome using an ultra wide kind of setup it really is. If you've drawn comics the standard way for very long, you'll realize that you're kind of limited with the width more than anything, because the length of the page is way longer than the width. And the way things work with comics is that you read left to right and then top down. And especially for racing kind of stories, we think of races, at least in the West, as going left to right. When you think of something that's moving forward and progressing, it's going left to right. So you're kind of limited with something like a race or a chase scene to go left to right or right to left, or keep going the same direction. Especially for this establishing shots. So here I'm putting in all the little details with actually I start using an HB when I do the finishes, which are the contours and all the rest of the small little details that I want to pop out. And so here with this ultra wide, I'm able to get this insanely panoramic shot, which I was super happy with. So here I'm actually moving on to the next panel, and this panel 2 spans the exact opposite way, and it spans vertically down. I wanted it to be just totally drastic. I wanted it to really get the most extreme comic experience. You're gonna read from left to right and then top down. So this top down is super vertical, and vertical stuff just really gives you a sense of speed. You read them quicker because you're reading the left to right first. So naturally, when you're doing pages, vertical stuff is quicker, and which brings to mind the first rule. You're using a double page, so might as well use these verticals to speed and keep the pacing right. So number 1 is control pacing with vertical or ultra wide panels. And you can get kind of creative with how and why you want to use these panels. In this case, I wanted it to be kind of like this quick decision that the characters make to go through this kind of tunnel way, because it's going to say on this little tunnel way, do not enter. So they're going to actually comment on it. They're going to be like, this is a dumb idea. Why are we going in here? And it's going to be used as a way to escape, kind of get these gangsters off their trail as quick as possible. And using this vertical panel in that way, as long as you have an intention, you can base a lot of your artistic decisions within the panel for that direction, that goal. Here I used it mainly, like I said, for that split decision, so I think it works. And then I just try to use the elements in the scene to kind of move the eye around. Notice how the bikes are leaning in, and that's kind of creating like an S shape. At the bottom, I try to use like smoke to like bring the eye back up, and then from there I use a mix of a couple different things in the background to try to help it out. I put a crosswalk at the top to try to lead to the eye. You just want to lead the eye to the next panel, and in this case it's on the top right, and these crosswalks are kind of breaking the panel a little lower than the normal panel edge, and so it's kind of pushing the eye to the right. I also have arrows there that kind of push your eye that way. That's a secondary thing, but mainly those crosswalks and pipes are really going that direction. Anything you can do to lead the eye will be super useful when your readers are actually trying to figure out the flow of the page. If they're having questions, it's either you went too experimental. If they can't figure out which way they're going with their eyes and how to read it, it means you went too experimental with the panels, or the bubbles, text captions, or the art is not leading the eye well enough. So that's one of the biggest goals that you should have as a comic book artist. It's like one of the key things you should be aware of and be focusing on. Now that doesn't really apply specifically to like double page spreads, but everything applies to storytelling, so it naturally applies here as well. So here I am again I always use the HB to finish things off, and I pretty much use only a couple pencils, but the HB is used for outlines, and sometimes I go a little lighter on some of the shadows just to get a harder lead and not smudge as much. Now here we're moving on to the next panel, which brings me to the second point on this kind of storytelling double page spread, which is if you're going this route of telling a story with all these panels spread across 2 pages, you might as well use the orientation of the panel to assist you. As you can see on this page, well, you can't see just yet, but you will see that I have the bikes in a top view here, and the top view is kind of being used as a orientation based tool. So this rule number 2 is to lead your viewer with the orientation of the panel and match it up with the kind of orientation in the story. So we got a top down. We know we want the bikes to go left to right, because the next panel they're going to read is to the right anyway. The story itself has its own continuity of going left to right, so everything matches up. Now, I wish there was a better word. Maybe some more experienced comic creator out there has already created this word and coined it, but it's kind of this technique of physically positioning and orienting your characters in the panel so that they actually are moving in the right direction of the next panel. So it's kind of like this trick of mixing the story perceptions with like your physical perceptions in the book. I don't know what that word could be coined as. Maybe I should try to come up with a few words, but for right now I'm calling it orientation. That's number 2. So far we got pacing. Make sure you pace with the right panels, and use orientation to assist you with the ease of the readability for the viewer. So here, this top-down view is pretty interesting because it's kind of challenging to get everything to read, and it's kind of a smaller panel, so I'm trying to get all these things to read, and I'm trying to get this flow at the same time, something that's dynamic enough. That goes without saying, because anything you draw you want to look kind of better than a photograph. Like if you just photograph some dude, I guess, driving through a like an alleyway or something. This is more than an alleyway, but it wouldn't look as cool. You want to try to design. The whole point of art is to try to make it better than reality, as that's always my goal. Some people have different goals with art, but that's one of my goals, is to make things cooler. I know that's one of the things Todd McFarlane always said was, how can we make this cooler than it already is? And that's why he got famous, pretty much. I don't know why it jumped there. Maybe I shaded everything in an off period of off-screen camera, but that page or that panel turned out pretty cool, and I think with color it will really stand out. Now this next one's a smaller panel, and it's just a basic panel. It's a 3/4 kind of view of the main character driving past us, and it's really just a 1-point perspective, a little bit tilted, and there's an explosion in the back, insinuating that one of these gang dudes just wrecked because they're going through this place that obviously they shouldn't have entered, and their technique of trying to get them off the trail actually worked. There's an explosion, and it kind of just adds to the sweet action sequence. On a side note, as I'm trying to think of things to say in this ultra long video, here with anything in comics, you're going to have one of your big challenges is to keep things consistent as possible. I've said it, I don't know how many times in videos, and I say it in videos just to really remind myself, if I followed all the rules that I put in videos, I would be much more masterful at all this. But even I put them in there because it reminds me to even do these things. Even though I'm aware, doesn't mean that you actually follow them. So here I'm trying to follow my rules and keep things consistent. It's tough to keep, especially hard surface like vehicles and things. I mean, faces are really tough to keep consistent on page. I'm super impressed with any artist that can keep a really consistent character, because some are better than others. Some guys get so realistic that it's almost impossible to keep it that realistic and that consistent. However, guys like Ivan Reis does it insanely well. Like I think that guy's superhuman with that kind of skill. There's plenty of like top world-class artists that do it, but that's one of the challenges anyway. So here everything is kind of rimlit because the explosions in the back. So a lot of things in the what you're seeing is going to be in shadow because the brightness of the explosion in the back is going to really darken everything in the foreground, give the shadows stretching out towards us. Now, when I think about cool action sequences and things that I remember, these are kind of them. This is kind of like a tropey thing to do, but it's like my first issue, so I might as well get it out of the way. These, it's one of the cooler things that Star Wars did it in Return of the Jedi with those speeder bikes. Some dude always crashes if they're not paying attention, and that was the goal here. I've got way more other kind of ideas, and I actually show off a couple later in the book, this first issue, of what you can do with chase scenes. But here we are with a close-up, and it's kind of just here to give, because you actually really want to give your main character a lot of screen time, and any kind of close-up you can get is going to be well worth the attention of the viewer. So bring that main character's face up front. I don't do it as much as I should. I'm getting better and better at this. I'm just so in love with backgrounds and just scenes as a whole. I look at everything as a whole way more than I should probably. Most guys probably, most artists, because there's girls out there who maybe lean this way too, but maybe I feel like the trend is that most people give the characters too much of an emphasis, and puts their kind of situation and FaceTime almost giving them too much of an emphasis, where I'm the opposite. I kind of don't give them enough. And here, this is me being like, okay, let's give this dude some FaceTime. And here he's smirking because his plan worked. And he's got his ex-girlfriend and his brother right behind him, kind of probably commenting, because as a side note here, I know these are stacking tangents, which probably is rule number 1 of kind of video vlogs rather than that you shouldn't do. But anyway, my tangent here is that when you're doing this kind of storytelling, and it's kind of like I think it's coined as the Marvel way, because I don't know, they're just the ones who did it. Either way, you do the art with a little bit of the plot, and then afterward you fill in with the actual words. So when I wrote this thing, this is what I'm following, not because I really think it's the best way, but it's just what happened naturally for me. I really think it is one of the best ways to pull off, especially stories that you're trying to feel out, and I don't have like the most solid of like set in stone details in my script. So here I'm doing something where I'm like, oh, I'm going to give him a smirk. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to be smirking or saying. I know what he's smirking about, and I know what maybe the caption is before it and after it and all the rest, but that's the way I'm moving with it. So here I'm using the kind of a varying kind of shot. So it's kind of a close-up next to these other shots with her, which are very pulled back. Like it's kind of hard to do a chase scene. Actually, when the last time I talked to a DC editor, which was Chicago or where I live in Orlando, at the convention, the last one I talked to actually mentioned like how tough it is to do a chase scene, and I think they were impressed with my not my skills, just that like, one, that I'm not afraid of it, but two, that it looks like it's clear. The thing is, I find that the more you pull back out of these kind of shots, with these, I wouldn't call them, they're kind of wide shots. They're not telephoto, but they are wide enough where you can see full bikes, full figures, and I'm still trying to like incorporate foreground elements and full backgrounds. And I think it's hard to do, because doing full backgrounds all the time, I must be an idiot for trying to do these chase scenes, because like they do require a good amount of background work. Like, you need to, like, since cars move and bikes move really fast, naturally your backgrounds change all the time, and since your audience don't really know what's going on and where they're going, you have to, like, you know, handhold them the whole way. Whereas if you're in a room and they're just chilling there with their bikes parked, or it wouldn't be a room, maybe a garage, if they're chilling in the garage parked, you know that you're in the garage until, you know, the scene changes. So in that case, you don't have to draw all these insane details every frame. But because it just went from an alleyway to a corner to a explosion in the corner after that to a highway, I've got to show all the details as much as I possibly can. I wish I just did this in a desert. That way it's like the same principle. I would draw a cactus and then I draw another cactus, and that would be that. But I'm actually really a big fan of Death or Glory. That's by another Remender book, but from Image. And dude, their chase scenes are awesome, but some of them are like in a desert and like different scenes that I'm jealous about, because they don't have to, like, I think it's Ben Gould that's really doing these awesome scenes, but they're wise choices on the environments on his part. So here is another, I'm using both the rules that I've mentioned before, which is pacing and orientation, which is I'm literally going from your eye from the bike that's jumping in the left side of the screen and pulling you to the right, where there'll be this light streak where our main character Atlas's bike is streaking to the right, going to the next panel. So I'm literally using a horizontal like shot, because I need to show multiple things, and I figure the camera would be there for a second or two, and it shouldn't be so quick, but enough to show the establishing shot, and two, orient the pacing of where the action is going to the next panel. You don't ever have to do this. You could do this with other things. The main character doesn't have to head physically to the next panel that is on the page, but I like it, and I think it is a good way to do it. Now, this next thing leads to the last big concept for this double page spread that I want to talk about, and that's contrast between your big shapes, your big the negative and positive space. It really just means that you need to vary everything you're doing. So with something this big, the viewer is looking at 2 pages at once. So how you lay out the panels and how much texture and the density of what they're looking at should be varied. That way the whole 2 pages can be viewed as one nice composition. So that's the last piece here, which is just vary everything up, vary the way you're doing your shots, and that's a given for any page, but definitely vary how much space and how much texture and how much negative and positive space you're giving. And there used to be this blog that I followed that was this concept artist blog that I followed pretty intently for a while, and I can't remember the guy's name. I really wish maybe somebody in the comments could. I think the website was Destructoid, maybe. Not Destructoid's like a gaming website. It was something like that. He worked on stuff like Darksiders. I can't remember this guy's name, but he's an awesome concept artist. Maybe somebody can find out. Anyway, his blog had all of this awesome advice, such as if you can't make pretty designs, make pretty lines. And I love that saying. But one that actually has a connection to what I'm talking about with this contrast idea is that he had this rule of thirds kind of viewpoint, where if you know rule of thirds, which is pretty much based on the golden ratio, which is about kind of splitting things up into thirds, he had this view where everything should be viewed in a 75-25 ratio. So let me explain a little further. So you can apply this 75-25 to everything, and should be applied because it will add that much more dynamic, appeal and everything else for your appeal for all your characters and appeal for the general composition. So with your how much dense textures are on the page, put that either in the 75 or the 25 slot, and the rest should be the opposite. So with your contrast, you want to have this asymmetrical viewpoint. So you want to have either a lot of white space or a lot of dense material on your shot, and vice versa. So here is a good example. Is if you look at the last panel here that I worked on was really long, and this one is kind of about a third of that panel. So this whole row is kind of got this rule of thirds, and over there was a lot in the last panel. There was a lot of dense details, all really detailed stuff in the background. And here we're breaking it up by going to a close-up where it's going to be very simplified and not as much detail. So it's going to give this 75-25 between these two panels, and across the whole page you need to look at it and see where you can add and take away and find this nice golden ratio for everything. To me, that was kind of a novel. The first time I heard that was a kind of a novel concept, because I think when people think of the golden ratio, they really just apply it to spatial relations and composition, where I think it should also be applied to absolutely everything. It should be in your list to take into account for not only composition, spacing, but how much detail, how much color, warm and cool colors, your ratio of backgrounds to characters, to how much consistency of speed bubbles versus just seeing silent panels. All that needs to be within this consideration of 75-25. So remember, especially on these big double page spreads, that's why I bring it up, because the bigger the canvas, if you will, the harder it is to get this right, because there's just more elements, there's just more things to do. If you're planning an event, the bigger the event, the harder it's going to pull off, because there's just way more moving parts. Same thing with like a vehicle. Now that I said moving parts, you're like, you making a helicopter and making that work is going to be way harder than like a lawnmower or something, where it's like, way less active moving parts. So with this double page spread, especially ones where you're trying to do storytelling like this one, and it's not one big splash page, you need to be aware of this contrast, this golden ratio idea as well. And I think overall the page was pulled off in that manner. There's a few things I would change if you go back, but that's something that I think everyone goes through when you kind of call a piece finished. You always could go back and change it. You just need to do it to your best of your abilities at the time and move on, and you're going to do better next time, guaranteed, as long as you give it your all. So there's another thing that's really cool about double page storytelling, and this is not one of my big ideas, but it's just like a side note. It's like it's cool because it kind of helps you with just natural creativity in your book. You just are able to maneuver your panels around way more and have new ideas, and it breaks up just the monotony of a single page, and having to get super creative within that single page. The double page just gives you a little more room and a little more time to get things more varied and more fun looking. I know the ones that really bring to that I can call in my memory is in the New 52 there was a Batwoman. Maybe it could have been issue 1, but if I can find it, I'm going to take a photo of it and I'm going to put it up on screen right now. But it was like this cool, really cool, like spherical type of double page spread with panels, and the artist was, actually I can't remember the artist, but it was like kind of like this surrealistic effect. And her hair was, her red hair was just like all over the place. And I remember just really iconic. It was one of my favorite double page spreads. And there's a lot of people that use it really well. And I think for a racing comic like I'm working on, it's extra useful because you're getting to have a lot more left to right action. And I think I chose a good time to use it, and I think I will utilize it way more in the future. I almost want to do a whole issue all double page and just get insanely creative with it. I don't think I've ever seen one of those. Guaranteed it's been done before, but yeah, that's one of my it's probably on my bucket list of just career goals, is to do one of those books, because that sounds like it's a blast. Anything that keeps it fresh, you want to keep that going for yourself. You want to keep it really fresh. Otherwise, you're going to get bored with whatever you're doing. And whenever you're bored, you're just, not that you're useless, you're just working at half capacity. You need to get in the flow and really enjoy what you're doing, because the more you enjoy it, the more it's just going to flow out of you. You're going to hit that flow state and get more done faster. And now here, I remember doing this one panel on stream, and I was really impressed with actually both these panels. This whole small panel was done on stream that I used to do on YouTube. Hopefully you guys remember it. It was called the Kick-Ass Study Stream, and I did it for about a year, and then I switched over to doing some stuff on Instagram, and then my life took over and I stopped streaming, but I plan to do it again at some point. I just think doing these choreographed and edited videos are more useful to you guys, and I think I got a lot more comments, and I think just more passers-by saw my work doing videos like this instead of the streams. Anyway, when I was doing the streams, this is when I was doing this panel so many months ago. I really liked how I was able to get this past, like, this whole panel is all about these the two sets of bikes going under a bridge, and that was the goal here. And then in the background just have a bunch of headlights, and I really thought it was a cool way to show depth by having this overhang shadow. I think I did an awesome job on stream, because there's a little more pressure. I don't know if any of you out there have tried to draw with others watching. It's a little more difficult, and I think I highly suggest you do it, because that in itself is a skill, and I guarantee it will help you just drawing in general. You get this odd sense of pressure of drawing well when you are on stream or people are watching, and so you easily get over you making mistakes and erasing and whatnot. And here I'm actually drawing something for one of our regulars, JJ, and he was asking about something about how to get some people crossing their arms, and I remember doing this, showing how to like kind of make your arms primitive shapes. Anyway, that's a super tangent. Anyway, excuse me. So once I finish this panel, this will be the last panel of the page. It's another ultra wide. It's one that takes up looks like 1 1/3 of a width of a page, and I think the next panel is my favorite, so stick around if you're wanting to see the finale of this. I think for the most part every panel was pulled off pretty well, but the last one I think was pulled off the best. But then again, this kind of leads to something else too. I think this last panel was the best, but also I believe the first one, the first panel that has that also ultra wide, has this kind of bookend effect. And anything that you're trying to like make feel complete, add this kind of bookend effect of kind of mimic what you did in the beginning. Any good speech begins with the ending, and then every ending kind of reiterates the beginning, and you can do that with panels and storytelling. That is a super pro tip, I think. Do that with storytelling, do that with visuals, do that with anything you can, and I think things just feel more complete and planned and fun that way. But also, since they're both ultra wide shots, they have this similar kind of correlating I guess posture to it. He is driving toward us, and then he's driving away on the last panel, which just has this beginning and end kind of feel. And I also think I executed the beginning and the end the best. So this last panel I think I did really well on, but that first panel is also really good. So the moral of the story here is a lot of comic artists will tell you pick and choose your battles, because you got so much work and so much drawing to do. You got to move those hands so much. You got to kind of pace yourself. Again, pacing, but yeah, pace yourself this time, and your energy and your design and just your time that you put in, and put as much time as you can on the beginning and end, because that's what they're going to remember more than anything, which goes for a double page spread, it goes for a single page, and it goes for scenes as well as the entire book. You want to like people remember the first and last page, but they really remember the splash pages. So make sure your beginning and your last splash page in your book are kick-ass. So here I'm doing a lot with perspective, and I think this is why this panel works so well. One, because I got this nice over the shoulder kind of a pulled back over the shoulder shot, and I get to show off the city at the same time. So when you're showing off a one-point perspective, you really need to get it right. You need to get what's the word I'm thinking about? Pretty much how things recede in the background, you need to get right. And you need to get that spacing right. I know when I might have said this before in one of my beginning videos, as I referenced David Finch a lot in my beginning videos, but David Finch in his perspective video always says to kind of guess at your receding kind of objects in space. Now that's good for getting intuitive about figuring it out, but I'm a ruler kind of guy, and I sometimes actually measure it out. And for some things that look the things that are prominent in the page, I do that for. And some things that are in the background, I do the guesswork and I do the intuitive method. There's something about getting a feel for that, which is super satisfying. Like you just guessing, you start feeling like Kim Jong-gi, and just really feeling like you're a master when you guess the perspectives pacing as you're trying to draw the background. Anyway, with all of this, there's been a element that I've been talking about, which is all the stuff that goes outside of this time lapse. You're seeing this thing at more than 6 times as fast. It took me, I'm going to say, at least 20 hours to finish these couple pages. And I had a blast doing it, but it took a long time. And because it's so sped up, you're missing a lot of the little things. I mean, if you really pay attention, you can kind of catch some stuff. Like right here, you see some of the reference I pull up. I've got an iPad to the left side of the screen that's kind of cut off. So there's always a reference around. I'm always taking pictures of myself doing weird things. Just trying to get the right feel for everything. And the right like folds in cloth, and just looking up weird stuff on Pinterest, sci-fi wise, and just trying to get cool ideas as I go along. Most books, you might do a lot of preliminary designs, but this book is so sci-fi based that I believe going and doing things on the fly is almost better. There's so many things to design that I couldn't possibly. I spent 6 months designing a lot of things in notebooks and in sketchbooks and in other sketchbooks and doing orthographics. I've done so many designs for Star Circuit already that it's insane. Like I've done way more designs than I've done pages. So in that way, I started figuring out like I could do designs forever. So I should stop and just design on the fly. And a lot of times if you design on the fly, you end up with what does Bob Ross say? Happy accidents, happy mistakes. I think it's just happy accidents, right? So when you get these little accidents, they lead to other ideas that you wouldn't figure out otherwise. And I think that's super important. It's something you miss when you it's like the same thing as you like having a physical bookshelf of books instead of like having like a library in a folder on your computer. When you look at something that you have to dig through like a bookshelf, you run across other things. And when you have to design on the fly and you make mistakes, you see things in the clouds, and you like just see things in the bad scribbles, and you just get your own originality out of it. I think like if you do too many designs pre-hand ahead of time, I think you're just going to end up with, by the time you get to the real drawing, it's going to be stale to you, I think. Jim Lee calls it, if you've seen some of his streams, shout out to Jim Lee, the great Jim Lee. He's got an awesome Twitch stream that I've joined on a couple times. And he said before that he likes doing not a lot of this pre-work. He actually does it all on one original artboard. He doesn't do a lot of light boxing or pre-designs. He likes to, as he says, figure out the puzzle as he goes. He doesn't want to do the puzzle over and over. It gets boring. If you are a master visionary like Jim Lee is, you're able to pull that off. And the more you do it, you don't have to put him on a pedestal. I think just the more you do the work, the better and quicker and more naturally you come up with these designs on the fly. So it's something to say about art in general as well. Just the more you do a certain thing, the better you get at it. And one of my favorite quotes that ties along with this little segment is what you put your energy and your focus on, you get more of. And I think that like little tidbit, it's almost life-changing as far as I'm concerned, because you just end up with this magical equation, and if you're stuck in whatever you're doing, just follow that. If you're like wondering why you're not as far ahead as you are, or you're not where you're at, there's a reason why you're not hitting your goals, or you're just not where you're at. Your focus is on other things, and within your art too. If you're not fixing the mistakes, it means that you're kind of not knowingly, sometimes you just do it unknowingly, but you're avoiding things and you're not being as truthful as you could be with the mistakes on your page. And the more honest you are, the more things get fixed and whatnot. For me, if I don't go out of my way to focus on figure drawing and studying that, geez, man, I would be like never drawing figures. I don't know. I'm so drawn to drawing vehicles and hard surface stuff. So we just finished the page. I'm going to go through it afterwards, but here I'm just cleaning off the back because it smudges so much on my drawing desk. I don't clean it enough, but here I am erasing. It's good to keep the pages clean for resale. So let's look at the page as we are done with it now. That's that sweet ultra wide beginning shot. It's actually cleaned up on the computer. And here we're going to scan through the next couple of rows into that panel. And at the bottom, my last piece here, my favorite shot. It's so nice. All right, thank you all for watching. This is, like I said, number 17 of comic penciling, and I plan to do more in this series. Thank you all for subscribing and liking and commenting. I've gotten some good responses from this series of videos. And please subscribe if you like this one. This one's an extra long video, and I like this long form a little better than the more 20-minute videos that I've done. If you'd like to see more of my work, go to catapanoart.com, and you can find a lot of my storyboards and comic work there. And lastly, if you'd like to check out Star Circuit, you can go to starcircuitcomic.com and read the first few preview pages. And if you'd like to support even further, you can share it, or you can go to patreon.com and help out. I'm doing the whole book by myself, so all of the support is greatly appreciated. I know we talked about a lot today, but just keep on drawing. You'll get better every day. And yeah, just keep working on your dreams. I'll see you next time.